Hey Encino, we've made exciting upgrades to your Amazon Fresh store, and it's time to celebrate with savings. Whether you're picking up this week's grocery haul or today's hot lunch, Amazon Fresh is your spot for big deals on your favorite items. Head to amazon.com/grocery store opening to find weekly deals, info on upcoming events, and more. Visit your refreshed Amazon Fresh grocery store in Encino on Ventura Boulevard.
Blog Talk Radio. Blog Talk Radio.
Live from Los Angeles, the Win Without Competing Show with Dr. Arlene Barrow, Career Coach 1 and author of Win Without Competing. Now, here's Dr. Arlene.
Thank you, Virgil. Welcome to my show. In tough economic times, it is especially important to implement my Right Fit method, which will enable you to win without competing in your career and in your life. Before I introduce today's guest, I want to read a short story from the last chapter of Win Without Competing, entitled The Right Fit, An Approach to Life. Homegrown, the process and the product. A chubby 6-year-old girl with long chestnut-colored corkscrew curls walked proudly, hand in hand with her dad, through the streets of Brookline, Massachusetts, the birthplace of John F. Kennedy. Her father, the cantor of a synagogue, seemed to know everyone. He would greet and talk to person after person. The little girl listened to every conversation intently while playing with her curls. After each conversation, her father asked his daughter, "What did we say?" He did not want her to recall the words that were exchanged, but the meaning behind the words. He wanted her to explain with whom her dad was dealing, so she would never miss the real message. Throughout her adulthood, he continued to teach her the most important lesson of her life. You must understand with whom you're dealing. I was that little girl, and the cantor who taught me was my dad. And his lessons did not stop with analyzing conversations. At age 7, I told my dad that I was planning to run away from home. I can still hear the torrents of rain beating on the roof of our home on the scheduled day of my departure. What did my dad do? He helped me pack my little pink suitcase. He dressed me in my matching pink raincoat and hat. Then he handed me my umbrella and stepped back. I walked to the front door and peeked out, observing the flooded streets. Then I simply closed the door quietly. My dad and I never discussed what happened. He knew with whom he was dealing, and that I was too intelligent to leave. At age 10, my dad told me I had executive ability. He gave me a stack of bills in his checkbook and showed me how to fill in the amounts so I could pay each bill. I immediately got to work. When my dad came home, he asked to see the checks. I told him I signed his name to each check, stuffed and stamped the envelopes, and mailed the checks. Astounded, he laughed. He erroneously assumed that I would only fill in the amount of each payment because that was all he had taught me to do. He forgot that he had taught me a more important lesson as well, to understand the real message. That's why I finished the job for my dad to save time for his personal pleasure. He expected the bank to return the checks to him and couldn't believe it when the bank did not recognize that the signature on the checks was not his. They never did. he proudly reported to my aunts and uncles that he had found an executive assistant, his 10-year-old daughter. My dad was the right fit for me. He knew how to mentor me using his own method to help me function effectively in a complex world using highly developed interpersonal skills. The ultimate outcome, I was successfully homegrown to succeed. Understanding what the right fits are for you, finding and capturing them will change your personal and professional life. The right fit method incorporates the mindset, tools, and strategies to achieve success in every aspect of your life. Searching for a new job? Walk down the right fit road, and here you're hired. Now, listen to learn about my right fit method from today's interview. David B. Opton, CEO and founder of ExecuNet. My guest is David Opton, who founded ExecuNet in 1988, the leading internet-based business and career network for senior-level executives and professionals with salaries above $150,000. After holding high-level human resources executive positions at Sterling Drug International and Xerox Corporation, Mr. Opton left the employee nest to become a highly successful entrepreneur. Welcome, David, to Win Without Competing.
Thanks, Arlene. I'm delighted to be here.
Take us back to your childhood. Where did you grow up, and what did your parents do?
Well, I was born in New Haven, Connecticut, in 1939, so that was just before World War II. My father had just gotten out of graduate school at Yale, and when the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor, he joined the Army Air Force, or Army Air Corps at that time. And so the next few years, we just kind of moved around, went to Pennsylvania, ended up in Florida, and just after the war in Louisiana. And when the war was over, my father, who was a zoologist and physiologist, felt that he had fallen pretty far behind in terms of what had gone on in his chosen field, so he took a teaching job at what was then called the North Dakota Agricultural College in Fargo, North Dakota. So our family moved up there when I was in the second grade, and we stayed there until I was in the seventh grade, and then we moved back to New Haven.
How did you feel as a child when you had to keep moving around? Was it difficult in terms of making friends?
I don't know. I think in the early years it really didn't affect me that much because I was, too young to really sort of register, and I was always, for whatever reason, I guess, a fairly outgoing kind of a person. I remember my father and mother telling me that when they would drive my dad to the air base, and I would hand flowers to the MP at the gate. So I don't know.
Nice.
Well, I don't know. I just did. I remembered that. But anyway, so I didn't have that much difficulty I don't think, in making friends, although when we moved to Fargo, we were moving from Louisiana, and I was, in the second grade. So I had developed a pretty strong Southern accent. And when I moved to Fargo, of course, it stuck out like a sore thumb. So I took a fair amount of ribbing for that, as I recall. But other than that, it didn't seem to get in the way too much.
Were you an only child, or did you have siblings?
No. I have an older brother and a younger brother. The older brother is 3 years older than I am. The younger brother is 5 years younger.
How did you get along with them?
I think quite well. In fact, my older brother and I, when we lived in Fargo, actually did a great deal together. I remember, in particular, it turned into some kind of like a ceremony each year, and we sort of prided ourselves on being the first kids in line when the swimming pool opened in the summertime. So we would, sort of camp out there the night before and try to be the first ones in the pool and all that sort of thing. So I got along with him pretty well, although my older brother is a lot more I think, reserved than I am. So, sometimes when I tried to pull the routine of you can't pick on me because my older brother is here, that didn't always work.
What activities did you enjoy as a child?
Trying to think. I guess, living in Fargo, North Dakota, where the joke is that there's 2 dates. There's winter and the 4th of July. So there were a lot of winter sports there, and so I got into skating very early when we got there, because you could skate from basically probably October on. And so I was very engaged in skating. In fact, later on became a pretty serious figure skater when I was younger. So I did that, and the other stuff that kids mostly do, baseball and football and that sort of thing.
Let's fast forward you. You have a bachelor's from Indiana University, and I know you initially started at Oberlin and then transferred.
Right.
What happened? Take us into your confidence and tell us what happened.
Well, what happened, I think, is not atypical of a lot of kids. I went to a school in New Haven called Hopkins Grammar School, which was a day school, prep school, which I will tell you right now saved my not only my academic life, but probably was more responsible for kind of what has happened to me since then than any other experience I think I've had on the educational front in terms of what they did for me. But in either case, at that time when you went to school, where you went to college was very dependent on the recommendation of the headmaster of the school. And for whatever reason, he thought Oberlin would be a good place for me. So I went to Oberlin. I loved it. But I certainly was not, kind of tuned in to the idea of that college was really supposed to be for serious stuff. So I spent most of my time, riding motorcycles, playing football and lacrosse, and going to class from time to time.
From time to time.
And,
that's a good way of explaining it.
Well, Oberlin is I don't know if the listeners are aware of this, but at that time, and I think even today, it's a small liberal arts school with a reputation for being very, very progressive on a lot of fronts. And back in 1957, for example, the school was on the honor system. There was no mandatory if you didn't have to go to class if you didn't want to. I mean, there was a lot of freedom that was not followed at a lot of other maybe more traditional educational institutions. And so I sure took advantage of that. And by the end of my freshman year, I got a letter from the school that simply said that, Dave, your grades are okay, but they're not where they ought to be. You're not working up to your potential, and we think that you need to go do something else until you appreciate the opportunity that you have here. And when you've done that, let us know, and we'll be happy to have you back. So when that happened, obviously I showed my parents the letter, and my father, who was, as I said, was a zoologist and physiologist, and certainly valued education a lot.
With 2 PhDs, am I correct, Dave?
That's right, yeah. And he had gone to Yale, and anyway, he was he valued that sort of thing a lot, and so he said to me, "I'll tell you what, maybe if we have you pay for this rather than me pay for this, you'll develop more of an appreciation for kind of what this is all about." So that's what I did, and they gave me a small inheritance that I got from my grandmother. I went away to a kind of a I guess a junior college. I'm not sure what you would call it. The following year, and did extremely well, and went back to was readmitted to Oberlin with no loss in class standing. Could have gone back as a junior, but by then I was married. And since I was paying for it, even if I hadn't been married, I couldn't afford to go back there. But anyway, I was married, so I had to find a school, A, that I could afford, and B, that had married housing, and that turned out to be Indiana.
Okay. So now we know why you went.
Probably more than you want to know, but
Well, that's fine. No, that's fine. Let's go a bit further. After you graduated from college, what was your first job, and how did you get it?
I got it through an interview on campus, and I was hired as a what was then called a Personnel and Industrial Relations trainee by the Winchester Western Division of Olin Matheson Chemical Corporation at their plant in New Haven.
Did you really understand what that position would be?
Not really.
No, that's what I had a feeling.
No,
so
it was. Nope, they offered me a job.
Yeah, you were happy. Okay.
Sure.
Let me ask you this: do you remember what transpired when you went out for the interview?
Actually, I don't. The interview that I really remember, but when we were taking interviews, was the one I had with J. Walter Thompson, because they were also on campus.
Ah, so what happened with J. Walter
Thompson? Well, that was interesting, because it's one of those things where, part of kind of career planning or life experiences is, you learn things like that. So one of the things that they always tell kids in college is, take as many interviews as you can, for the practice and so forth and so on. So J. Walter Thompson was one of the first companies to come to campus, so I signed up for the interview. I walk into this interview. It's one of these, typical 15-minute college interviews. And at the end of the interview, the guy says to me, well, Dave, I'll tell you what, here's an application. I'd like you to fill this out and send it back. And so I walked out of there and said, wow, this is pretty easy. This is great. So, but then I looked at the application, which turned out to be 4 pages, which the first page was demographics, and the second and third was you had to pick, I think, 3 or 4 advertisements, and in 50 words or less, write why you thought they were good or bad, and then you had to submit a 1,000-word autobiographical sketch. And so I did all that, forgot about it completely, and about, a month and a half or 2 months later, I get this call saying, we'd like you to come to New York for an interview. And I'm sitting there saying, who pays for that? They said, we will. I said, oh, good. So they were going to pay for the interview, and I thought, well, that's good, because I lived there or close to there, and I could, set up other interviews when I was there. And so anyway, short story, I went to J. Walter Thompson. I got there at, I think, 8 or 8:30 in the morning, and I ended up interviewing with a different person every half hour until 5:30 in the afternoon.
Did you know what position you were being interviewed for?
It was, some kind of a trainee position that paid $75 a week.
Okay.
And by the time I got back to the HR guy's office at 5:30, I had an Excedrin headache like you wouldn't believe, and a very strong belief that advertising was not for me.
Now, that's very interesting, because I know when we spoke before, you said that when you were graduated from college, you didn't really know what direction you were going to take. So with advertising, why did you decide it wasn't the right fit after your whole day affair at J. Walter Thompson?
I don't know. I just felt it was kind of like, I thought it was too intense. I thought a lot of what one of the things they did at that time was each person's office, I guess at a certain level, they were allowed to decorate it any way they chose. So there was a very wide variety of sort of motifs. I don't know. I think I thought it was a little pretentious, and for reasons it just sort of rubbed me the wrong way a little bit.
You weren't comfortable, I guess. It didn't feel like a cultural fit, apparently.
Right.
It
felt a little artificial to me.
Going further, tell us what happened at Olin, because I think that is an interesting beginning to a career that really started you off in a long-term direction, which evoked lots of passion in you. So tell us what happened at Olin.
Well, that was a time when a lot of companies had very sort of structured training programs, particularly for kids coming out of college. So I went into this program, and it was like you spent a month or two in this department, a month or two in that department, and so forth. I had never been inside a factory in my entire life. The Winchester Western Division of Olin was the largest employer in the city at the time. I think there were like 3,000 production and maintenance employees there, part of the machinist union, so it was a unionized operation. Plus, they had a number of other facilities there as well, but I was in the Winchester Western Division where they made firearms. And so I started out in the employment department and went from there to compensation to safety and a number of them. Anyway, the last stop on the rotation was labor relations. And they did that on purpose because they were also going into a contract year. So what was supposedly a 2 or 3 month kind of a stint actually turned out to be more than that, because as they ended up having their first strike in many, many years that particular year. So I got a chance to stay there for quite a while, and the more I got involved in it, the more I liked it, because it was just an opportunity to. I was spending a lot of time with people in the plant. I was out in the plant a lot, and to me, it was exciting. In fact, one of the most fun things I did during that strike was, because, when you're on strike, there's no production, so they sent me out and they said, what we want you to do is to write a daily strike report. So I would roam around interviewing pickets and, just writing up generally what the tone was here, there, and everything else, and they seemed to like it a lot, and I enjoyed writing it, and so anyway, at the end of the rotation, they said, what do you want to do? I said, if I'm going to stay in this thing, this is what I want. This is the part that's exciting to me. The rest of it I felt was too routine.
Okay, so labor relations turned you on.
Yep.
Tell us about what you created, the so-called voluntary disqualification.
Oh, yeah, I forgot about that. Okay. One of the reasons I liked, one of the things they had me do was, when you have a unionized shop, you have a grievance procedure. If anybody has a complaint or thinks that the contract's been violated and so forth and so on, so you have a grievance procedure. And my job was to hear grievances up through and including the third step, which is the step just before arbitration. And I wrote job descriptions and so forth and so on. One of the biggest problems that they had at the time was most of the plant was on a piecework system. Those were, back in the days when there was a lot of industrial engineering, and you got paid on piecework for a lot of stuff. So people would bid on different jobs, and different jobs paid more or less for whatever they were doing. But if somebody got into a job and for some reason or another were not able to keep up or produce the quality work they were supposed to and so forth, there was a provision in the contract that allowed the company to disqualify them after going through procedures of, are they fully trained and so forth and so on. And it created a lot of animosity, and people were being disqualified all over the place, and we were spending an enormous amount of time in grievance hearings, going through what kind of felt like to the employee being prosecuted for not being able to perform this job and so forth. And so what I finally did was I thought, well, maybe the way to change this is to not make it so adversarial and try to create something where the employee doesn't feel that they're being put upon this way, because in a lot of cases I knew perfectly well that the employee couldn't do it, but was really fighting back because they felt he was being, beat up on and demeaned and so forth. So I created a form called a voluntary disqualification form, and wrote it up in a way that it said to the employee that they were making the decision to take themselves out of this particular job, and I put a clause in there that said, I, Dave Opton, choose to exercise my right under Article such and such of the contract to disqualify myself from this position, and exercise my right to bump into whatever job it would be, and that turned a lot of people around because they felt that, hey, this isn't such a bad thing. This is something I'm doing rather than somebody doing something to me.
I think it was a brilliant strategy as well as pitch, frankly.
Well, I don't know. I didn't think it through. It just sort of came to me that it seemed like, why not try to do that? The other thing I tried to do in doing that also was to try to go talk to the employees without a union steward around and without the foreman in the room, and make it a much, much less formal kind of a procedure. And initially I had to be a little bit careful doing that so that the union didn't get upset, but I also had very good relationship with the stewards. And so they would, sometimes allow me to do a lot of things that maybe they wouldn't otherwise have allowed me to do because, they guard that pretty carefully and say, well, we don't want you talking to anybody without the steward there and that sort of thing.
Well, clearly you have very strong interpersonal skills, and you were only in your, I guess, early 20s at that time.
Yeah, I was too young to know any better.
Well, you spoke up, and you spoke up in a way to really help people. Would you say it was at that time that you started to become passionate about labor relations?
I don't know if it was labor relations as such, but I really found that I got a lot of job satisfaction out of doing things that seemed to help resolve a problem. And I guess at that time in my life, I was passionate about labor relations. But I think where the job satisfaction was coming was I was working in an environment which, generally speaking, is perceived to be adversarial, and tried to create a relationship with people that was a lot more collaborative. And when I was able to do that, I felt good about that.
Your next position was with the City of New Haven. How did that come about, where you became Director of Labor Relations?
Well, at that time, as I said, I was pretty psyched about labor relations, but I was also only about 25 or 26 years old. And one of the big steps in labor relations is being able to try arbitration cases and or represent the employer at the bargaining table. And in industry, certainly at that time, that was not something that you were going to be able to grow into at that age, and it probably was 15 or 20 years ahead of me if I was to stay in a more traditional setting. But as it happened, the state of Connecticut passed a Municipal Labor Relations Act in 1965, which mandated collective bargaining for towns and cities. And so the city decided that they were going to hire somebody full-time in that role. And so when the director of administration for the city, had to find somebody to do this, and he happened to be either a neighbor of or friends of the personnel manager at an operating unit that was in the building next door to where I worked. It was a company called United Nuclear Corporation at the time, and I guess two of them were talking at some point, and Dennis said, I'm looking for this kind of a person, and this fellow that I knew, because we used to have lunch and stuff a lot because we were so close together, said, well, why don't you talk to Dave? So we did, and so there I was, and they hired me as the Director of Labor Relations for the city, and I was very excited to do that because I thought, even though I knew municipal labor relations was going to be a lot different than working for a public company, the opportunity to get that kind of experience at that age, I thought would be a terrific thing, to put on my resume, and so I should take advantage of that.
Tell us what you accomplished there. I mean, clearly at a very early age, you not only thought divergently, seeking new solutions for difficult situations, but you also exhibited the ability to take charge, to manage the process. So what did you do to take charge as the Director of Labor Relations? Because after all, you were the first person in the position.
Well, as I said before, I was too young to really know what I was getting myself into. But
nevertheless, you did.
Well, yeah.
That's what's brilliant about it all.
Well,
you just proceeded.
As I said, I don't know. Anyway, yes, I did. And basically what I was trying to do was to kind of learn initially what the real differences were between municipal labor relations and labor relations that went on within a public company. And I immediately found that there were a lot of major differences, not the least of which is that when you're working for a city where you're not talking about a for-profit operation and that sort of thing, if you think some things are dysfunctional or not particularly well organized in a company environment, that is nothing compared to what it's like with a in a municipal setting. It was unbelievable. So I guess what I tried to do more than anything else was to try to put a process in place and to try to get things reasonably, at least tried to get them somewhat organized and non-politicized.
Do you remember negotiating any kind of contracts at all during this period of time?
Oh, yeah. I had, at the time I went there were, I've forgotten now the total number of unions, but I had all the unions except the teachers. And so that meant police, fire, public works, cafeteria workers, that's 4, and there were I think I had the school custodians, but not the teachers. And it's been so long ago now I've forgotten. But anyway, so I negotiated contracts for all of those. And
how did you manage to do that without a law degree, Dave? Was
well,
that a help or a hindrance, do you think?
Well, it's funny. A lot of people thought a lot of cities went out and hired lawyers to do that. I think the reason I was able to do it was because if I go back to Olin, remember I said there were 3,000 employees there,
right,
in a unionized environment. So in terms of understanding what that labor agreement was all about, and I'd been through a couple of different negotiations at that point. Not that I was representing the company, but I was there the whole time, and indeed drafted a lot of the language as part of what they asked me to do. But the point is, we had a lot of grievances there. We used to do 100 arbitration cases a year, where most companies, if they were doing 1 or 2 a year, it was catastrophic. We were doing them all over the place. And so I'd had a lot of experience in over 5 years in going through a lot of this kind of stuff, and I knew what how negotiations went, and I knew. When you're trying to settle grievances and so forth, that's a negotiation all by itself in many cases. So it wasn't like I hadn't had some exposure to what this process was like and what the relationships were all about and that sort of thing.
But still in all, I mean, you had to have understood contracts well enough, because apparently you worked without a lawyer, or there were lawyers. Right. You worked without a lawyer. I mean,
we would have once we had reached an agreement in principle. He wasn't there in the negotiations, but obviously we would have to show the agreement to the the town council or something like that. But they really never got involved that much.
Okay.
It wasn't that. I don't know. I just didn't think about it that.
Well, you were young, so you just did the job.
Well, yeah, and I was very used to, I knew what contract language was. I'd been dealing with it for 5 years. I know how it reads, and besides which, it really, at the end of the day, I said we had 100 arbitration cases a year. It was really pretty funny. You go into arbitration. Somebody asked me one time, well, what does an arbitrator do? And I said, well, what an arbitrator does is comes in and tells you what you meant when you wrote something. So I got pretty adept at trying to be pretty clear.
How long were you with the city?
5 years.
Okay. Then you went off to Rouse Company. What happened?
Right.
What was that all about? I know it's a developer. What did they develop, and why did you go there?
Well, the reason there were two reasons. First of all, the reason that I left the city was because the incumbent mayor, who had been there for like 15 or 16 years, a guy named Richard Lee, who at the time was the president of the U.S. Conference of Mayors, and the reason he was because New Haven had developed a reputation for being a very, very progressive city in terms of redevelopment and things of that nature. He left office, and I was not crazy about the guy who replaced him. So I had made up my mind I was going to leave. But the impetus for the Rouse Company was I happened to be there during the 60s when there were a lot of race riots in the U.S., as you may remember. And New Haven certainly had its share of those, as along with Detroit and L.A. and a lot of others. And I was, like anybody else, I mean, I'd been with the city for 5 years. I could kind of see what was going on and so forth. And I was very, very concerned about the problems facing urban America. Still am, for that matter, but I was very concerned about it then. I was also at that time became very, very active in the New Haven JCs. Anyway, long story short, the Rouse Company, which was a shopping center developer initially, but Jim Rouse, who ran that company, was one of the true visionaries, I think, in the U.S. And he one of his dreams was to build a planned city. And taking a lot of the lessons that he learned from observing what went on when Reston, Virginia was built, secretly purchased 17,000 acres of Howard County, Maryland, and got them to change the zoning laws so he could build Columbia, Maryland, as a planned city. And my boss at New Haven, who was the director of administration, had gone to work for the Rouse Company to direct a project in Hartford, Connecticut, and the Rouse Company said, we need somebody to come down and be the operations person for a thing called the Urban Life Center, which was going to be a conference center that did workshops on teaching other cities across America what the Columbia process, how it worked, both economically and otherwise. And so he said, well, why don't you talk to Dave? So they did, and I went down there and I interviewed, and I was just so struck with Jim Rouse and the vision that he had. Plus, when I left New Haven, as I said, I was extremely concerned with what was happening to the cities, and I felt that if private industry did not get very heavily involved in trying to deal with these kinds of issues, that we were in really, really big time trouble. So even though I had a job offer at that time from the U.S. Conference of Mayors, and also was a candidate for executive vice president of the U.S. JCs, I just said no. I want to go try to do this because I think it's hopefully going to do some good.
So that was the right fit for you, the Rouse Company.
Yep.
And what happened there? Because I think you're a little disappointed.
Well, what happened was the Urban Life Center, while it was a great idea, it didn't make any money, and for a whole bunch of reasons I won't bore you with, but it didn't, and they finally couldn't support it anymore. So after I'd been there, I guess a couple of years, they just closed the place. So I had to go find myself another job.
And I'm gathering that the next place that you went was the Xerox Corporation. How did you get there? You were there from 71 to 83. What prompted you to go to Xerox? Well,
it's kind of like what we talk to our members about all the time. It was through networking. In this case, my wife had been a customer rep for Xerox before when I met her, and so when I was looking for a job, she called the fellow who was the branch manager for her when she was in New Haven, and said, my husband's looking for a job, and he's kind of like at that time I think they were calling it personnel, not labor relations or industrial relations, but anyway, that's what he does. And so Don said, well, send me his resume and I'll send it along to someone, which he did, and he sent it to the guy who was the personnel manager for Xerox's Mid-Atlantic region, and they asked me to come in for an interview, and I guess made an error in judgment and hired me.
Well, let's hope they didn't make an error in judgment and hire you, because if they did, they had 12 years of an error in judgment. What did you accomplish during that 12-year period?
I'm just kidding.
I know.
Of course. Well, I did a number of jobs. I started out there actually in their employment area because that's where they had a need to start with, but also because it's a great place actually to learn what a company does, because when you're in the employment area, you cover everything. You're not just in one narrow thing. So it was a great way to learn. But I went through a number of different positions there at the region in Washington, and just before I transferred out of there, I was appointed as a personnel operations manager, which was a kind of like a what would I call it? A circuit riding personnel manager. In other words, I had responsibility for about 8 branches throughout the Midwest, and some of them in the Mid-Atlantic region. And I would go from branch to branch to branch, doing sort of a generalist personnel kind of a role. A job that I loved because I was in the field and just had a terrific opportunity to build relationships with people who were, as I say even today, were out there firing with live ammunition. Who were really out in the field and making sales and making service calls and process, and it was just kind of fun. And I really enjoyed it. I did that for, I guess, a couple of years, and then I was asked to become the personnel person for the Xerox Latin American group in Greenwich. And so I went up there for a couple of years, and then they asked me to come over and be the run the personnel department for Xerox corporate headquarters, which I did for 7 years.
Why do you think they kept promoting you? What did you achieve for them?
I don't know. I guess I would say this: is Xerox at that time, and I think even today, I mean, it's a sales and marketing driven company, and sales folks in particular, as I think you probably know, generally tend to be have a lot of energy. They like to get things done. They sometimes can be kind of frenetic. They're competitive. They're enthusiastic, and that's a lot of my personality. I mean, I used to tell people all the time, I don't perceive myself to be particularly strategic, but if you give me something to do, you will only have to tell me once, and you won't have to worry about whether or not it gets done. I will make it happen, full stop. And people tend to start to rely on that after a while, and it's so that's what I did.
So whatever they wanted you to do, you got the job done, is what you're saying.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
Why did you leave?
Primarily because at that stage in my life, I said, I think I want to be a vice president of personnel when I grow up.
Okay.
And Xerox is at that time was about I don't know how many billion-dollar company, but it had like about 130 or 40,000 employees. But the short story was I wasn't about to be a VP of personnel, anytime soon, given the number of folks that were running around, and plus I would have had to live in Rochester, which I really wasn't excited about doing. And so I said, I think I want to do this, and a headhunter came and blew in my ear one day, and I had the opportunity to do it, and I said, okay, I think I'll go do it. So I did, and that's when I joined Sterling and became the VP of Personnel for their international group.
But then you did leave. Why did you leave there?
Because it was because the company was bought. That was funny because when I was switching industries, I'm coming out of office products and going into pharmaceuticals, about which I knew nothing, and so one of the things I was trying to explore in my due diligence was, what do you think the chances are of, mergers and all this kind of stuff? Oh, there's never been an unfriendly takeover in the pharmaceutical world, and blah blah blah. Anyway, long story short, if you remember what was happening back in the early 80s, there were a lot of mergers within the pharmaceutical world, and And so Sterling was ended up being bought by Kodak. So I was part of the acquired company and on staff and out of a job in very short order at age 48.
And what did you decide at that point?
At first, I thought, well, the good news was that I hadn't been there long enough to build up any really strong organizational identity, such as I had with Xerox. I think the hardest career decision I ever had to make was leaving Xerox because I loved it. I still love it, but I did, and so I really didn't have that strong an identity. So the fact that okay, it was bought, and I said, well, what the hell? I'll just go get another job with a corporation someplace, and really didn't think about it that much until I got out into the marketplace and discovered a few things. But so I said, well, that's okay. I'll just, I'll go do that. I went out into the marketplace and discovered that, and even though we were going into a recession at the time, it wasn't like I was having trouble getting interviews. I was doing fine on the interview front.
Well, but I guess you knew how to pitch yourself then.
Oh, sure. And
well, you say, oh, sure, but lots of people don't. So that's, yeah, lots of people don't.
Well, I don't know. I just didn't have too much difficulty getting interviews. I don't really know why exactly. Although, I've been living in this area now for a long time, so I knew a fair number of people and that sort of thing. And being in what is now called the HR function, I knew a lot of headhunters and people like that. So I was able to at least let the world know that I was looking. And so I wasn't having too much trouble getting interviews at all. But what I was finding in the interviews was that I was not, my juices were not flowing. I was hearing stories that I'd heard before. I just was not excited about this for whatever that reason was. And so after I'd been out in the marketplace for, I don't know, probably 6 or 8 months or so, I think I told you this when we chatted earlier. I was at an interview with a pretty big company in New Jersey. Started that interview process at about 2 in the afternoon, and left there at about 9 or 9:30 that night. And I remember walking out into the parking lot, getting in my car, and sort of thinking to myself as I was driving up the Garden State Parkway and saying, if this guy calls you tomorrow and says, Dave, we really would like you to take this job, and here's a blank check, and fill in the blanks, and what would you do? And I don't know. It was sort of almost like I had an epiphany or something. I just said, you know what? This is silly. This is not me. I'm going to go. If I'm going to go through this kind of stuff again, I'm going to do this for myself. I've seen this movie before, and so that's what I'm going to go try to do. And so at that point, I really stopped looking on the corporate side totally, and said, I'm going to see if I can figure out what I'm going to do to make a living next, but it's not going to be this. And it was sort of out of that experience that I migrated into ExecuNet.
So when you got home from the interview, you told your wife that you were going to do it on your own. What did she say?
Well, I think at that point she said, well, okay, if you think that that's something you can do, that's, I don't have a problem with that. She said, how are you going to, what is it that you think you're going to do? And I said, well, I don't know. I've been sort of playing around with this. At that point, I was involved in a small networking group, like a lot of us are even today. And I said, I'm going to maybe I'll just see what this consulting thing is all about. And she said, well, how are you going to do that? I said, well, consultants, get hired by referral. They don't get hired because they run an ad in the yellow pages, or and I certainly haven't written a book like, so nobody's going to come pounding on my door. You better have a network. And I said, so I'm going to build a network and play with the one that I have, and we'll see what happens. And I could afford to do that to some degree because I had a really good severance package, and my kids at that point were a lot further down the educational road than my peer group was. So I could afford to take some financial risks that a lot of guys my age could not have taken at that point. So that was, kind of where luck
So
plays a role.
ExecuNet was seeded at that point in 1988.
Yep, it was.
Now, I know that you decided to focus on executives who were in 150,000, and of course you were one of them. Is that the primary reason why you selected that group?
Not so much. It was first of all, it's a market segment that I knew because of where I'd worked. So I felt comfortable interacting with senior level executives. So it was sort of natural for me to sort of stay in that environment because that was the world in which I'd been living for a long, long time. But the real reason, the real motivating factor for me in deciding to really sort of turn this into a business and make my living from it, I think really grew out of my own personal experience in going through a job search. Even though my background is in human resources, one of the key things and key learnings that I had in going out into the marketplace was that I very quickly began to understand that there was a huge difference between understanding something on an intellectual level and experiencing it on an emotional level. And I'm talking there about the feeling that someone who is in transition and feels in terms of just kind of how the marketplace interacts with them and how they're treated. And I said, this is terrible, and it's not right, and there ought to be a better way to do this, that I am not a different person today than I was 48 hours ago. It is not my fault that they sold this company. There's got to be a better way to do this. This is just stupid. And so I sat down and I said, all right, look, I said, if I am a job candidate, what is it that I really want from this process? And the answer in a simplified way came back as, all I really want is an opportunity to compete for a real job at a time when it's meaningful and be treated with some measure of dignity. I know there's competition, and that's okay, but that's really all I'm asking for. I said, well, all right, if I'm a recruiter, what do I want? Well, if I'm a recruiter, what I want is access to qualified candidates at a time when it's meaningful to me. I do not want to get into a fight with somebody over who's qualified and who isn't, and I want confidentiality when I need it. And so I said, okay, well, if I can create an environment where those elements come into play, there's a need for that. And that was kind of the shape of the idea.
Okay, so that was the seed of the business model then, Dave?
Yep.
All right. So now when you started in 88, we didn't have the Internet. And
right.
then in 95, you did put ExecuNet on the Internet. Mm-hmm. So what did you offer initially? And then what has the Internet enabled you to do that you couldn't do at the beginning?
Well, at the very beginning, it really was. It was really all about jobs. First of all, because of when it was back in '88 and the early '90s. I mean, that was the last bad recession that we had, particularly in between like '91 to '93 or whatever it was. So there were an awful lot of people running around looking for jobs. So it was all about jobs. And really not a lot more than that. Although I did at that time start writing a newsletter that I sent to everybody every couple of weeks, which I called ExecuNotes, because I couldn't think of anything more clever to call it, but which talked a lot about trying to give some advice and counsel and stuff on the process itself and how they could help each other and help the network and so forth. So initially it started out that way, but over the years it obviously has grown way beyond that in terms of. So we're now really truly a career and business network. We've got, I would say right now, the the makeup of this network is about 60% of people who are currently employed and 40% who are currently in transition.
How would we recognize the ExecuNet brand?
Well, I don't know. I think that a lot of people, a lot of prospective members call because they put us in a space with a job board because nobody knows kind of where to put us. So we're sort of there whether we want to be or not, and we really don't perceive ourselves that way at all. What we tell members is this is something you join, just like any other professional group. It's a private network. You join it, and we try to provide you with benefits of membership that will hopefully make you feel that it's worth your while to be a part of it, and that you are taking away from it those things which are helpful to you, either on a professional level or a personal level or both. I think the other way that I would like to think that people would recognize our brand is that is the perception of the level of the quality level of the product and service that we offer. We are very, very high touch. Have always been that way. Want to be that way. That's part of being a member. I mean, with the first probably 3 to 4 years that we started this business, I wouldn't let anybody in here unless I talked to them myself, personally.
How many employees do you have today?
I think about 55.
Okay.
The last time I looked.
Maybe some snuck in while you weren't looking.
Well, I tell you, the funny thing of it is, you work for a large company like Xerox, where the time the personnel policy manual probably weighed, 8 pounds and was, 8 or 9 inches thick, and I walk around with a 8.5 by 11 piece of paper folded up in my pocket that's got, that's how I know how many people we have on staff.
What advice do you have for entrepreneurs who are struggling?
I guess I would say it's more than anything else. I think that what it's about the passion that you feel. I mean, this is the most exciting thing I have ever done in my life. It is the most satisfying thing from a job point of view that I've ever done in my life, and I don't know whether the passion comes from the satisfaction or the passion comes from being able to see the impact that what you're doing has on the lives of other people. So I think it's really about passion more than anything else. Because there are an awful lot of times when I can't believe the hours that neither did my wife. The hours that we put into this. There were lots of times I ran this business out of my house for about 3 or maybe it was 1990. It was probably 4 years before my wife threw us out, and I was up 2 and 3 o'clock in the morning a lot, just doing all kinds of stuff. And so I guess the word is passion. And I'm not sure where that comes from. You would know that better than I would, but I know that's what I felt, and it's what I still feel.
Now let's look at your personal life. How did you select? I know that you've had 2 wives.
Yep.
And I'm curious about how many years have you been married now to the second wife?
I don't know, pretty close to 40.
All right. How did you select the second wife? If you had to create a blueprint of the right fit wife, what would you put on that blueprint?
You mean other than the fact that they put up with me?
Well, that's part of it, but let's hear what qualities, what were you really looking for? Intelligence, interpersonal skills, charge? What were you really looking for?
Wow. I guess I was looking for someone who with a lot of energy, and she definitely has that. Somebody who is independent, which she certainly is. I'm not sure what other qualities there were. I mean, this is so sounds really silly, but when I met Mary Ann, I knew. I mean, it was kind of like one of these things. Like I said, "Oh man, I can't begin to do. I'm going to marry this person. I can't believe I'm going to do this." And I fought that for probably close to 2 years, because I had only been recently divorced, and I had sort of made a pact with myself that I was not about to do anything on the marital front for 3 years, to make sure that my head was square and I wasn't just doing things. And I met her, and I said, "Oh my God, this is." I don't know, it was like instant bonding, and that was that, and I gave her a terrible time for about 2 years. Because she was ready to get married, I wasn't, or at least I kept telling myself I wasn't.
And then she finally caught you, Dave?
Well, yeah, what happened was, you asked me when I left the city of New Haven, and so I knew I had accepted this job in Columbia, and, I said, you better ask her to marry you, because if you don't, you're gonna, she isn't gonna wait. So that's what I did, and thank God, she said yes, and she's. I'll tell you this right now, as far as this business is concerned, I absolutely would not have this business had it not been for her.
Now, why is that? That's very interesting.
No, it's true. It's absolutely true. Because when I first started, I knew there was a business here. I really wasn't running down that road to do that. And so I would say, can you help me with this or help me with that? She said, sure. And then I remember, I don't know, I guess I was into this about 2.5 or 3 years, and she grabbed me by the throat one Sunday night and said, let me ask you a question. You keep talking about ExecuNet as this business development thing, and you're just kind of doing it as an avocation and so forth. And I've observed that you're working on this 7 days a week, and so am I. And could you please help me understand how it is that, you're making a living from this? And by the way, you're spending a lot of your own money on mailings and things like that, and would you please go do something about this? And I said, okay. So I said, yeah, you're right. I probably should. So she helped me, and I mean, in ways I can't even begin to express, because I was out doing a lot of things. She was on the phone all the time, and she has a gift. Among other the gifts that she has is she's able to, she could hear your voice on the phone, and you'd call her back in 3 months, and she could remember who you were.
That's amazing.
It is amazing, and I used to think it was baloney, but I've seen her do it too many times to know that it isn't. I have no idea how she does that. But, I mean, I still have members today who, will call me up and say, is Mary Ann still there? I say, well, she's not here, but she's still there. So she builds rapport very, very quickly and was extraordinarily helpful. And just, so I went ahead and I did it.
Tell us the story of how Mary Ann came home one day and surprised you with a house.
Well, we lived in Weston, Connecticut for 28 years, which is 7 miles from where I'm talking to you, in Norwalk, Connecticut. And one day, about it'd be 5 years ago in July, Mary Ann walks in the house one night and announces to me that she had bought a house in Rhode Island. And I just looked at her like, what did you just say? She said, I bought a house in Rhode Island. I said, why? I mean, I can't believe you did that. And she said, well, I did. And I said, well, why did you do that? And she said, well, one, I've always wanted to live by the water. 2, you're in the office 7 days a week. And since Rhode Island is not as close as we are now, maybe moving to Rhode Island will get you out of the office, if not, so that's part of the reason she did it. Because she said, and she's right. I mean, it's nothing I ever would have done on my own. I was very angry about it. But, there's no question that it was the right thing to do at this stage of our life, and so she just did it. And I was so angry, as a matter of fact, that I didn't see the house, physically see it until the day we closed. She showed me some pictures and stuff, but I wasn't even going to go up there and see it, but it's fabulous.
So she did the right thing.
Absolutely.
How do you balance your personal and professional life?
I don't. That's why she moved.
That's my point. I was dying to ask that question because you told me before you were a workaholic. So
yeah,
I couldn't wait. I couldn't wait to get to this question.
Yeah, I'm sure. No, of course. You said how do you manage your personal life? I would say, what personal life?
Right.
And that's not great, but I'm getting better. Not terrific, but I'm getting better.
Well, I guess Marianne helped you by purchasing the house, which would then entice you to visit there more often.
Well, I mean, I go up there. I mean, what I'm doing now is I have a studio apartment here, and I drive down here on Mondays. So I get to the office here at about, I would say, 10 or 10:30, and I usually work out of here until Thursday, and I try to leave Thursday around noon if I can, and go up there, and I work out of there on Fridays. So I'm there Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and in some cases I'll even sneak out of here on Wednesdays, and that's particularly true now through the wonders of modern telecommunications. I mean, I could literally work out of there every day if I really wanted to, but I certainly don't want to do that. I think I want to be here, and there's a need for me to be here, I think. And so I do it, but I have a nice home office there, and for right now, it's great. It works fine.
Well, Dave, I have to say this has been a great pleasure to have you with me and our listeners. Thank you as well. It was a delightful interview.
Well, I'm happy to do it. If it helps somebody, that's great.
Thank you so much, and please come back again soon.
Okay, thanks for having me, Arlene.
It was a pleasure. Please join me again next Wednesday, May 20th at 5 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. My guest will be Mr. Robert Horton, the chairman of Alchemix Corporation, a cutting-edge alternative energy company, which he established in 1998. An expert in his field, Mr. Horton has been active in energy and environmental technology since 1980. Among his activities, he organized, managed, and sold the China Coal Pipeline Company to Enron in 1997. Prior to that, Horton, in partnership with the American Broadcasting Company, organized and created the world's largest travel franchise company. Since childhood, through the influence of his clinical psychologist mother, Robert has been a student of human personality. Beginning in 1975, in addition to his other career interests, he began working on what has become the interviewing method, a precise and comprehensive means of distinguishing core personality traits. In the early 1980s, he founded the Carefree Institute, and with the help of the Educational Testing Service of Arizona State University, developed the Interview, a comprehensive personality assessment tool. The Interview has been used by tens of thousands of individuals over the last 20 years. To learn more about my Right Fit method, visit winwithoutcompeting.com and drbarro.com. To contact me directly, call 310-441-5305. 310-441-5305. or email drbarro@winwithoutcompeting.com. Remember this trigger tip. Walk down the right fit road, and here you're hired. Goodbye for now. This is Dr. Arlene, author, Win Without Competing, Career Success the Right Fit Way, Career Coach 1, and founder and CEO, Barrow Global Search, Inc.
Have you Googled yourself lately? Are there negative posts from an ex-employee or from a former client? Maybe an outdated news article? Search engines don't always get it right. For right or wrong, it's your reputation on the line. That's where Reputation Defender by Norton comes in. Take control with Reputation Defender. Their cutting-edge approaches help you to wipe away unwanted information in your search results. They also promote the good stuff. You can start by getting your free reputation report card at reputationdefender.com or call 800-811-4975 to speak to an expert.
With the VSP Individual Vision Plan, you're the one pulling the strings. Because when getting vision coverage through work isn't an option, taking care of your eye health comes with a lot of decisions that only you should make. Like choosing how to save on the lens enhancements you need, the right name brand frames for your style, and choosing your eye doctor from the nation's largest independent doctor network. Even how you enroll is up to you. Make the best decisions for your vision at the eye doctor's office, retail locations, and online with VSP Individual Vision Plans.